I was body shamed in the locker room by a coach in front of the entire varsity team. When I was 16, I told my story this week. I was 16, and I thought I was invisible. Not in the way teenagers usually feel invisible. I was on the varsity team, swimming. I was good too, top 50 in the state, but I'd always been conscious of my body, the way my chest looked in a swimsuit, the way my arms weren't as defined as some of the other boys, the constant awareness that my body was being looked at. I tried to minimize it. I'd change quickly in the locker room, avoid mirrors, keep my head down. Coach Holland noticed anyway. It was before a competition. We were all getting ready, and he called me over in front of everyone. The entire varsity team, 23 boys, all turning to look. "You need to hit the gym," he said. "You're not going to get faster with that physique. Look at yourself. You're soft. The water's going to slow you down." I remember the silence. I remember every pair of eyes. I remember my best friend Ethan looking at his shoes like he couldn't bear to watch. I remember the heat in my face and the shame that poured through me like ice water. "Yes, sir," I said quietly, and I changed faster than I ever had. I quit swimming 2 weeks later. I told my parents I lost interest. I didn't tell them about Coach Holland. I didn't tell anyone. That was 23 years ago. For 2 decades, I carried that moment. Not constantly. It would fade for months, then resurface when I caught my reflection a certain way. When someone made a comment about fitness, when I was in a locker room, the shame wasn't rational. It was cellular. It was embedded in how I saw myself. I'd worked out obsessively in my 20s, not for health, from fear, from the belief that my body was fundamentally wrong. My therapist and I spent years unwinding where that belief came from, but I always knew it started in that locker room. This week, I told my story publicly. My company was hosting a workshop about workplace wellness and mental health. They asked for people to share experiences with shame and body image. I almost didn't do it, but I thought about that 16-year-old boy, and I decided he deserved to be heard. I stood in front of maybe 40 people, and I talked about Coach Holland, about what he said, about the silence that followed, about how one sentence in a locker room shaped my relationship with my body for 2 decades. I was shaking, my voice cracked, but I finished. What happened next was unexpected. 3 people came to me afterward. One man said Coach Holland had said almost identical things to him in football. He'd never talked about it. He said hearing my story gave him permission to finally grieve what happened. Another woman shared that her coach had done something similar, not about weight, but about being not feminine enough for the sport. The third person just hugged me and cried. But the moment that changed everything came from my colleague, a woman named Iris. She said, "I played under Coach Holland too, women's volleyball. He wasn't your coach, but I heard through the grapevine what he said to you. I remember being relieved it wasn't me that day, and I felt guilty about that for years." She'd been waiting to tell someone. I looked up Coach Holland this week. I needed to know if he was still coaching. He's not. He retired 5 years ago. Part of me wanted to contact him, to tell him what he did, but I realized that wasn't the point anymore. The point was that I'd carried his shame long enough. Telling my story didn't erase what happened, but it moved it from a secret I protected to a truth I own. There's a difference. One makes you small, the other makes you real. My 16-year-old self needed to know that his body was never the problem, that Coach Holland's cruelty wasn't about his physique, it was about Holland's own brokenness. This week, I finally told him that. I looked in the mirror at the body I've spent 23 years criticizing, and I said, "You were never soft. You were brave. You just didn't have anyone protecting you when you needed it most. That boy deserved better. That boy deserves to be heard." And this week, finally, he was.